Runner, swimming coach, and lover of rugby. Let's talk being Black and living in London, featuring Harriet Small. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Runway podcast. I am your host, Kim, and I have a very special guest today. Please welcome Harriet Smalls to the show. Welcome, Harriet.
Hi, thanks for having me, Kim.
How are you?
I'm good, considering everything that's going on. The last couple of weeks have been exhausting. But it's getting better.
Yeah, it's been exhausting, I think, for the whole world these last couple of weeks. So let's introduce you to our audience. Tell me a little bit about yourself. So where are you from originally?
So I am originally, my family are immigrants from Uganda. We came to the UK when I was about 1.5. About 1980 something, won't reveal my age. And I live in a part of London called Camberwell, which is southeast London, but it's really close to central London. So that's a little bit about where I'm from. And I also work in PR and communications. So that's my day job. I've just recently finished working on the collapse of Thomas Cook for our regulator, so the regulator of the airline and travel industry. So that's what I do day-wise. And then by night, I'm a runner and a fitness enthusiast, I'd say, putting it mildly. Yeah.
So how did you start running? What made you get into becoming a runner?
So when I was at school, so I went to boarding school, and we were split into sort of houses. So in my house, I was known as the runner, so I would run everything from 100 meters right up to 10,000 meters. And I loved running. It was like my favorite thing. And then as the years went on, I stopped running as much. So last year, part of the work that I do in our industry is around increasing diversity of Black and ethnic minorities. So I help a charity called the Taylor Bennett Foundation. So one of their annual events to raise money is to do the Royal Parks Half Marathon. So I was asked to do it, and I hadn't run for a really long time. Mostly been doing spin, gym work, and everything else. So I started training to run, and that was really, really interesting. I learned things about myself. I learned things about running, the running community. It was really eye-opening how much I could challenge myself, because I was really scared, because I'd never run a half marathon before. So that's how I got into running recently.
Wow. Wait, so what year was this?
Last year was my first half marathon. The furthest I'd run was probably 10K.
Really?
Previously, yeah.
So you just got back into running last year?
Yeah.
And you jumped right into a half marathon?
Yeah.
So how did that go for you? How long was your training process, and how did you build up to running 13.1 miles?
So I started off by having the schedule, following the schedule. I did a lot of spin. I did a lot of strength training. So I really struggled with running outside. So I had to push myself quite hard. And then that's when I actually joined the Adidas running community. Because I was struggling to push myself to run by myself outside. On the treadmill, it was easy because I'd put on a podcast, or I would watch something and just run. But then I knew, if I'm going to do this, I have to be able to run outside. So joining the running community was really, really beneficial. Funny enough, another thing that I did that I discovered that was so interesting is I started volunteering at races. And I didn't know that people volunteer at races to get free places into the next race, because races are quite expensive. So what people do is they volunteer. So I volunteered for quite a few races in 2019. So 2020, I had loads of race places, which now sort of are null and void. But that was also something I discovered along the way, is the race day atmosphere and how people sort of interact and come together. it was all part of the training, and it was all sort of a good mental build up. Just seeing the way people do stuff during the races as well really helped me. So that was part of my training. And then, as I said, the strength training was so important. So I did a lot of sort of spin. That was incredible, and a lot of weights, which used to scare me quite a bit. So I'd always lift small, so the 5 and the 7s. Then I was able to do squats on larger weights, which for me was incredible. It was a challenge, and I really enjoyed it. And I think that's one of the reasons why I was able to sort of get through the race on race day, just having that mantra in my head that it's one step in front of the other, rather than thinking about it as it's a half marathon.
Now, you mentioned that you volunteered for races to get race entries into other races. Does London have like in New York, we have New York Road Runners. That's an organization that puts on the marathon, and they put on a bunch of races throughout the year. Does London have like a main organization like that puts on your races?
So our races are mostly put on by brands or by sponsors. So you've got major races put on by Virgin Sport, which is the Oxford Half, you've got the Hackney Half, and you've got the A6 10K. You've also got races that are put on by big brands. So for instance, Adidas have their flagship races, mostly 10Ks, although this year they added in a half marathon, which fingers crossed will happen in November. And then you also have big races which are put on by charities. So for example, Cancer Research UK puts on a massive race, and they put on different races as well across the country, mostly 5Ks, and they're targeted towards fundraising for cancer research. So you've got a lot of those kind of races that happen across London, and then you've got the London Marathon as well. So you've got that, the flagship one.
That's interesting, because in the States, most races are put on by organizations, and they'll have sponsors that, supply the race shirts. Maybe they'll supply, like Gatorade is a huge sponsor in the US. So that's interesting, the difference between US racing and London racing. So we know each other through the Adidas runners community. I think we got in contact. I did a little promo for the New York City Marathon last year, and I think that's how we got in contact with each other on Instagram. So how did you get involved with Adidas runners? Because I know I like to ask a lot of Adidas runners that story, because everyone's story is just so interesting. So how did you get involved with AR?
So last year, when I was looking for running gear, I went to the Adidas store in central London, and I was trying on trainers, and I was really sort of struggling with the right shoes. And so one of the guys in the store said to me, well, why don't you join the running club, because you can try on trainers there, and then you can figure out what works for your foot and what doesn't. And I was like, well, what are you talking about? And then he showed me the website, and then I signed up. And the day I was going, I was so scared. I was so nervous. I thought, this is a running club for a major brand. Obviously, everybody's going to be able to run. They're going to leave me in the wind. It's going to be, am I going to fit in? And like all that kind of stuff was playing on my mind. And then I went along, and everyone was nice. We have this thing here where no one gets left behind. It was such a different atmosphere from what I was expecting. And I think if I let the initial fears and doubts stop me, I would have missed out on this incredible community. Because in addition, here we have Adidas London studio, which is run by the Soul Sisters. And it's a fitness space that's women only, and it's inclusive. We do classes with some of the top trainers. There's stuff in the morning, in the lunchtime, in the evenings. It's just a wonderful space. So on top of the running, I've got this amazing fitness space that I can go to. Also, there's the community, which is also just so many different people. It's vibrant, it's fun. It's now become a part of my life. So yeah.
So what is the studio space? It's Adidas branded space, and you guys have access to it for free?
Yeah, so we have access to it for free, and it's mostly fitness classes. So there's TRX classes on there. We've got the normal sort of fitness classes. So you've got dance classes. Depending on what's been put on, the Soul Sisters do their signature shred. So there's all different classes, and then that's where we run from as the AR ladies, the London ladies. So we do our sessions mostly on a Wednesday evening and on a Saturday morning. So that's where we start from, and that's where we finish. It's just an amazing space, and then afterwards we can do classes. It's got shower facilities. Wow. So I mean, yeah, it's an amazing space, and it's in the heart of Shoreditch, which for London is sort of it's right on the cusp of the business district, but it's also really sort of trendy, arty kind of place of London.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's in a really cool spot.
Well, you guys are lucky because we don't have that in New York. I mean, we get to have like classes, like they have mindset classes. We have parties, we have get-togethers, we have classes here and there, but we don't have like a dedicated space just for classes. So you guys are really lucky. And when I visited Greece, they had a whole 3-story studio as well. So yeah, I think you guys in AR in Europe, you guys are like doing it up. I'm like, every time I visit Europe, I'm like hoping that there's an AR location where I'm going so I can, meet new people. And yeah, the AR community is just great. I mean, it's amazing that we're 5 hours apart right now and we're talking and we're just able to connect with people all over the world. So I'm happy that we are both a part of that community and we're both benefiting from it. So I always like to ask everyone what type of sneakers they're wearing because I'm a sneakerhead. I'm a girly girl, but I like sneakers as well. So what type of sneakers are you running in right now?
So right now I'm running in the original Ultra Boost. That's Ultra Boost. But the funniest thing is that I had a pair last year that I ran my half marathon in, and then my mum asked me for them. So I gave them to her. And then I continued running in my Ultra Boost 19s, but then I just didn't feel comfortable. I felt like I was missing that shoe that gave me my half marathon. So I went out and got a pair of the original ones, and I'm running in those at the moment. But I do mix it up. I mean, my training shoes are different from my running shoes, so I always train in Nike Zooms, not the new ones, the old ones. So I have a mixture.
Okay. Yeah, I run in, I just switched back to Ultra Boost. I really like the lightweight sneakers, but I was having a lot of shin problems. So I had to switch back to Ultra Boost for the added cushion, but I'm enjoying them and they have a lot of good flavors out now. So I get to match them up with my outfits and look cute while I'm running. So you did the half marathon. You said that was last year?
Yeah.
Okay. So have you done a lot of racing after that, or do you have a favorite race that you've done to date?
So I was supposed to do the Hackney Half, which was in May. I was supposed to do the Adidas 10K. But funny enough, the Adidas 10K, which we were supposed to do, got turned into a virtual race during the pandemic when COVID started. So it was turned into a virtual, which was really cool. It was supposed to be so they did it as a 1 hour. I don't know whether you've heard of that before. So it's a 1 hour race and it's how far can you run in an hour. So that was really fun. So I did that during lockdown. But I think my favorite race to date, funny enough, is actually the Cancer Research 5K. I did one in 2011 and I absolutely loved it. Everyone wears pink. It's just such a fun atmosphere. It's exciting, and you're doing it for a great cause. There's so much emotion, but then it's emotion that's placed in something that's going to move things forward. So there's people there raising money for cancer research, and a lot of the people who run it have been affected by cancer themselves, or they've had family who've been affected, or friends. And it's just such an amazing, warm race to be a part of. Even though it's not the most beautiful in terms of the route, depending on which part of London you choose, but it is just an incredible atmosphere for me.
So you can do different routes on the race?
So they do them in different locations, so you pick and choose which one you want to do. So you can do one in central London, you can do one in other parts of London. So for example, there's one that's done in Blackheath, which is a really nice part of South London. That's a massive park and green space. So they're in all different places, and they've got them all over the country. So you just choose which one you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, so we're going to get on to the topic of today's discussion. So we're talking being Black and living in London and being a Black runner in London. So first, I just came across this classification saying, I don't know how I would describe it, but it's BAME, B-A-M-E. So tell me a little bit about what that means to you or in general.
So BAME is a new classification of how Black, Asian and ethnic minorities are classified in the UK. It's quite controversial because a lot of people find that the term lumps everybody in as one rather than separating people out with their nuances. So London's quite interesting in the makeup of its ethnic minorities. It's 59% white. However, you've got a massive percentage of Asians who are made up by Pakistani, Indian, Bangladesh, Chinese, Vietnamese communities. Then you've got Black, which is Black Caribbean, which is the Jamaican community, Trinidad and Tobago. You've got St. Lucia. You've got all these different communities who identify as Black Caribbean, and then you've got Black African. And so the feeling is that when you lump everybody together as other and you name them BAME, you take away all those separate nuances. So for example, me being a Black African, I don't have the same cultural context of London as somebody who is Black Jamaican, whose parents came over here in the Windrush. The same way somebody who is Vietnamese won't have the same nuance or context or understanding of the UK as me. So it's almost a one brush, but then you lose all the wonderful texture within that layer once you've brushed over it with the term BAME. Yeah.
Which is interesting, but I know in America, like, they like to call all Black people African American, and everyone's not African American. You know, I have a lot of friends from the Caribbean, different islands, and they classify themselves as the island that they're from, or they're just Black. So is there, like, when you meet different people, are they, like, how would you classify yourself if someone asked you what's your race?
So I would say I'm Black. But then if I'm then talking to my friends, I will then break it down. So if I'm with my Nigerian friends or my Caribbean friends, I would say I'm a Ugandan. Or you say you're a British born. So because I'm not British born, I don't really say it, but a lot of other people say I'm British born Black. So it varies. I mean, the thing as well is that many of us who grew up in the 80s and 90s, we have a strong connection and identity to our countries of origin. So for example, I speak my mother tongue. I speak several languages in Uganda because I also went to school over there. So I speak several languages over there. I know how to cook the food from over there. There's so much connection that I wouldn't even think about erasing that. And I know, like, when I speak to my friends who are Ghanaian, Nigerian, South African, you know, we all consider ourselves the country that we're from or that we're born. We also consider the country that our parents are from. So it's that struggle to hold on to part of our identity. And I think there's books that have been written about it, and there's a lot of conversations that have been had. But I think from my standpoint, I will always consider myself Ugandan. And first, before I consider myself British.
Now, You mentioned some people classify themselves as British Black. So if someone asks them their ethnicity, they're saying I'm British Black. Is there like a class system that someone would say I'm British Black instead of I'm just Black? I mean, you're obviously British, but why would they say I'm British Black?
So normally it's so normally they say I'm Black British, which is them
Black
saying
British.
I'm born here, but I'm
Mm-hmm.
Black.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, if I had children, they were born here and they were raised here, they would probably say I'm Black British, which means I identify as British and Black. So that's more common.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it comes back down to how much attachment do you have to the origin from which you came from. So for me, I can say if somebody asks me, I'll say I'm British, I've got a British passport. But if you really wanted to ask me, I would say I'm Ugandan, because that's where I have most of my attachment from. I mean, I've got so whenever I speak to kids or young people and you ask them, you know, where are you from, and I'm British, and then you delve deeper and they say I'm Black British, and then you delve deeper and then you find out that their parents are from somewhere else and they were born here, and so that's how they identify.
That's interesting because being in America and just looking at London, we don't see a lot of imagery of Black people on the shows that we watch. From the only Black shows that I watched based in London was Luther, which I loved. I just saw Gangs of London, which is not really Black based, but they're Black characters in that show. But that show I just watched it a couple weeks ago, so I was addicted to that show. And what was the other show that I watched? There aren't many, but all the movies that I saw, like Love Actually, there's no Black people represented in those movies. Do you find that, are there a lot of Black representation in media, like celebrity wise? I know a few celebrities that have crossed over to America, but I don't know, what is the representation like?
So talk about representation actually is quite interesting, because I worked at Sky, which featured the Gangs of London show, and I actually spoke to the guy who commissioned it, and I was saying, you know, thank you for putting it on, because a lot of times we are always written in as additional characters. We're not part of the center of everything. So growing up, we had some shows. For instance, we had a show called Desmond's, which was all about a barbershop, and he was Guyanese, and they were all mostly Black characters, and Desmond was working really hard to then provide for his family and then go back home and settle there. Representation is changing, however, it's a slow burner. And for us, I think we've always looked at America, whether that be growing up, we looked at things like Fresh Prince, Sister, you know, we looked at Brandy, we looked at all those things, and we saw what we weren't seeing here. So for many of us, we grew up on the American shows and the American movies. However, things are changing. I mean, our soaps have become more diverse. So we have soaps here. So we have the main soaps, which is EastEnders, Hollyoaks, Coronation Street. They are changing, but it's a slow change. Mainstream comedy is changing. So we've got amazing comedians here, like Mo the Comedian, we've got Judy Love, we've got so many others, but it's slow. And for many of them, it's a case of starting off on the really small stages and then working their way up as a background act, or doing things on YouTube. And I think the next generation that's going to come up will be luckier because a lot of the doors have been opened for them. But even if you look at things like television presenting, I mean, there's still lack of representation. You look at things like sports pundits and commentators, newsreaders. I mean, growing up, the only newsreader I remember watching, there was only two. There was Trevor McDonald. So it's slow, but it's changing gradually. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, so the running groups in London, I'm following a few running groups, but what is there diversity in the running groups? And I know when I started running, I joined an all Black woman running group because all of the other running groups, they were like competitive running groups and white. Quite honestly, there wasn't many people of color in those groups. So I really didn't have a lot of options to meet up with other runners that look like me in New York in 2012, which is still sounds crazy to me. So what is the makeup of running groups in London? I know AR is diverse, but how is it outside of AR?
So it's actually really interesting that you bring that up, because we have a campaign here called This Girl Can. So it's run by Sport England, which is our sort of governing body for sports. And they've been doing a lot of research into physical activity in different groups, whether that be men and women, based on disability, based on class in terms of income. And they've got, their statistics came out with Southeast Asian and Black people as the least active. So it's really interesting when you go to the running groups. A lot of them are white dominated, a lot of the coaches, a lot of the trainers. It's only when you have the ones by the big brands, so for example Adidas, Nike, Virgin, that you start to see representation. But most of the other ones, it's mostly white. And I can understand why, because when you look at sports in this country and you look at the sporting boards, you look at the governing boards, a lot of them are white dominated. I mean, we had a report come out just a couple of days ago, and out of all the boards, whether you look at tennis, whether you look at football, whether you look at athletics, you look at rugby, you look at golf, the representation of Black people is next to nothing. So even though young people are seeing personalities of Black and a few Asian on TV, that's not then translated into what they're doing in their daily activity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, you go for races. So I remember when I was in the pen for the half marathon that I did, I was the only Black person until another runner came in, and because she does a lot of races, she's called Adrienne, that was when I started to feel comfortable. But up until that point, I was just the only Black person in that sort of waiting area, and it was actually quite scary. You know, you look around and you don't see anyone who looks like you, and you start to think, should I actually be here?
Yeah. And you know, running is just, we're even in the US. I mean, I travel a lot to different states to do races, and oftentimes me and my friend who I'm with, we're like two of maybe a handful. And we know it's a handful because every time we run by each other, we say hello. And there's not that many hellos going around. So it's interesting that the dynamic is kind of the same in America as it is in London in regards to race and running. So I wanted to talk to you about the protests because, you know, it's been like a hard few weeks here in America. We had the murder of a runner named Ahmaud Arbery, who was out jogging, and he was terrorized, he was chased, he was gunned down by a father-son duo. Then we had George Floyd, who was a victim of police brutality. I'm sure you've seen the video. And additionally, Breonna Taylor, who was also shot and killed in her own home by the police. So they're protesting in London. I saw them take down a statue of Robert Milligan. And you just being in America, I wouldn't think, well, I'll let you talk about it, but is there police brutality in London as well? Are you guys experiencing something similar there?
So police brutality in London has always existed. It's not new. I mean, we've had famous cases here like Cynthia Jarrett, We had a couple of years ago, we had Mark Duggan, who was killed by the police, and then subsequently we had the London riots. So there's a history of it. There's cases well documented. When I was young, we had the killing of Stephen Lawrence, which was a racially motivated attack, and then the subsequent failures by the police to bring the perpetrators to justice was huge. So for us, there's been a history of it. I mean, even during this pandemic, we've seen it. So one of the things I think to give context is that we had a report come out over here about the disproportionate deaths of Black and Asian ethnic minorities to COVID. We had a Black woman who was spat on. She worked on the train, so she was a transport worker. She was spat on, and then subsequently she died of COVID, and the police closed the case. So all those things adding on to what's happening in America, it's almost like you're adding fuel to an already burning fire, which was happening over here. So, and the thing is with racism over here, it's not overt. It's very backhanded. It's comments. It's structural. It's more put in place. It's not overt where someone's going to call you a word out to your face. I mean, those instances do exist. I mean, we've got far right groups that exist, but in most cases, it is very much microaggressions, and it's very much about having barriers in place that stop people from accessing certain things. And so I think those are all things that need to be really thought about. And then we're also coming off what has been a long road with Brexit, so leaving the European Union, and how that campaign was run, a lot of the messaging around that campaign. So there's all those factors that you've got to take into consideration when you look at the protests and where we've come from over the last few years.
Yeah, I mean, I think, most of my audience is based in America. So I think what we don't see much, actually. I don't see much of what's going on there. So it's interesting to see that you all have some of the same struggles that we are having here. And, we're different, but we're the same. Yeah. So let's get off of that topic for now. Let's get into, something else. So I want to talk about your experience as a swimming coach, which is awesome because you don't see a lot of Black swim. I mean, I'm a swimmer because, I do triathlons. I've been swimming my whole life, but we don't see many Black swim coaches. So how did you get into that?
So I swam as a child. So my mum and my dad always take me swimming, loved it, and just kept going with it. It was something that never ever left me. So when I finished secondary school and I needed a university job, I went and got a job in our local leisure centre as a receptionist. And so they said, oh, and you can swim, so you can train, become a lifeguard. So I trained and I became a lifeguard in like the first 6 months. After that, they're like, oh, you train and become a swimming teacher and a swimming coach. Like, okay. So I trained and did that. So from around 2005, for about four or so years, I was a swimming teacher and a swimming coach. And it was an incredible experience. But again, it was interesting because a lot of the adults that used to come for me to teach them were mostly Black. They'd never learned how to swim.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because my mum had learned how to swim when she was older, so I could empathise with them and I could understand why they felt that they didn't know how to swim. And they used to say to me things like, oh, I can't float. We've always been told that Black people can't float. And I said, yes, you can float. You just need to know.
I'm sorry,
you
go
just
ahead.
You just need to know the technique. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of misconceptions within the Black community around swimming. I mean, there are the struggles around the hair and the skin with the chlorine, but overall it's an incredible exercise. It's really good for mindfulness. It's the one thing you can do without even looking at your phone. So you just swim up and down, you don't even need your phone. And so it's very freeing. So I taught swimming lessons for schools, and the good thing is that for me, I live in an area that's one of the London boroughs that's got a high population of Black and Asian children in schools. That it was really good for them to see me teaching them how to swim. And up to now, I mean, some of them are about 16, 17, and I still see them and they're like, you taught me how to swim. So yeah,
awesome.
I absolutely loved it. Yeah.
And we have that in common because when I was in high school, I actually trained to be a lifeguard as well. And I used to teach swimming lessons as well when I was younger. So we have that in common as well. But it's crazy because when I like swim and train, it's like I'm the only one in the pool, you know, in my neighborhood. My pool is in my neighborhood and I'm still the only one in the pool, which is crazy. And like when I do a master's swim class, there's maybe 2 of us, 3 the most in the pool. So I think in the States, it's like a matter of, it's economic and it's also a matter of access because there just aren't a lot of pools in New York City. I mean, I have a pool in my neighborhood, but we just don't have a lot of access. And I actually learned how to swim by going to summer camp every summer. So that's where I hone my skills. But it's interesting that, I mean, we're still limited to this day. I always hear that excuse of, I don't want to get my hair wet. And I use it myself too, because I should be swimming more and I don't because I don't want to get my hair wet. But yeah, it's great that that is part of your background. It's awesome that you are a swimming instructor and you're helping, you know, older adults like hone their skills and develop a new skill that is going to definitely benefit them in the future. So let's talk about you being a rugby fan. Now, I had to Google what rugby was because in my mind, I thought rugby was polo, you know, when they're on the horse with the mallet. But I'm like, let me Google what rugby is before we talk about this. So what is rugby? I saw the guys running with a ball, and what is rugby and why are you a fan of rugby? Because it looks dangerous. Why do you like it?
So it's really interesting. So I discovered rugby when I was about 14. So I was in school. So we're doing our house competitions, the ones I explained earlier. And I had just finished like running and I was with my friends chilling. And I saw my first ever game of rugby. Some of my friends were playing. Other guys, in fact, one of my friends broke his leg that day. And I just fell in love with the sport, like watching them run across the pitch with the ball and people tackle. And I was just like, wow, it's incredible. I absolutely fell in love with it. So I've been following rugby since then. And fortunately, I come from a country that plays rugby with Uganda. So we've won an African championship. We've had some amazing coaches over the years. And so I just love rugby. I'm a big fan of the New Zealand All Blacks and the South African Springboks. But what's really funny and what I struggle with is this misconception that I shouldn't be a rugby fan. And it's really because I've really struggled to support England over the years because there's always the question of, why do you know about rugby? Black girls who don't know about rugby. Do women play rugby? You know, next year we've got a Women's World Cup, and a lot of people are so confused as to why everyone's talking about a Rugby World Cup next year. And it's because World Rugby actually removed the gender naming of it. So how some sports, so football for example, they'll say Women's Soccer World Cup, so World Rugby removed the gender naming. So whenever I say to people, are we going to Rugby World Cup year next year, everyone's like, we just had one last year. I'm like, no, this is the women's one. So I absolutely love rugby. I mean, some of my best friends are rugby players, and I understand the sport, and it's so detailed, and I see a lot of representation within the sport that's come up in the last couple of years. I mean, the other day I was listening to one of the rugby podcasts on BBC 5 Live, and they had some incredible players talking about race and rugby, and even here and where I'm from in Uganda, it's still a very elitist sport. So it's still a very kind of private school sort of grammar school kind of sport where your parents have to pay a lot of money because you're going to get injured. There's a lot of training. So there is that aspect to it, but it is a beautiful game. I absolutely love it. I love watching the tackles, the runs, the kicking, you know, the scrums, the line outs. Just it's exciting. I watch football like normal, what you guys call soccer, and I'm just like, okay. I don't see like, okay, how hard was that? But then when I watch rugby and you see the way in which like they have this thing called phases and people just try and get the ball forward and forward and forward and forward, you know, the passing, all those things just excite me. But then there's also that side of it where if I go for matches or I go for events and people start questioning, you actually here for the sport. You know, some people think I was introduced to rugby because I dated somebody who was a rugby player. Some people think I don't even understand the sport. I just talk about it. You know, there's all those misconceptions around a black woman just sort of being a fan, not being an ex-player. So I've never played the sport, but some people think I've played it because I love it so much. And I think for me, one of my biggest struggles, I think over the last year and a half that I've really been thinking about is the women's game. So women's rugby is massive, but it's not yet fully professional. And I think one of the things I would love to be a part of or even see or just see move is the women's game being taken much more seriously. So the same way women's tennis is taken seriously, that's what I want to see for women's rugby. So for me, that's like my thing that I just love.
Are there black women players in the game?
So you've got countries that have a massive representation of black women. So the usual South Africa, Kenya is a really strong rugby playing country for black women, despite the makeup of the country. You've got England has a couple of black women on the team. New Zealand has a lot of women who are indigenous, from the indigenous islands, Polynesian. Australia, I'm not 100% sure the makeup of their team, but it's really interesting because what I love about the women's game is that it is just as exciting as the men's game. But I do think that they have a long way to go because they're not yet fully professional. So some women will come out of it because they can't commit to it in terms of paying everything for themselves or doing it on top of their day job. But it is getting there.
So now I'm going to go on YouTube and I'm going to look up some. Who's your favorite team?
So in fact, funny enough, it is actually the English women's rugby team is my favorite team.
Okay, so I'm going to go on YouTube and look up the English women's rugby team and watch their games. I'm going to report back to you on what I think of rugby. You're going to convert me into a rugby fan. So I want to talk about your Instagram account, Hardy's List. So what made you create this account and what's the purpose of it and how are you looking to grow the account going forward?
So when we started lockdown, everyone kept asking me, can you recommend trainers? Can you recommend people I should follow in the fitness space? I want to do some exercise and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, I'll have a think. So I would give out names here, there. But then as time went on, they kept coming back. So I said, okay, what I'll do is I'll create an Instagram account that's there. You can see which trainers are there and you can pick and choose. And one of the things I really wanted to make sure when I did it was that it was a diverse list, because I was struggling a little bit with this idea where some people, when I'd ask other people like, which trainers do you follow? And it was one type of trainer. And I was like, but the fitness industry has people of different shapes and sizes, people from different backgrounds, people who do different disciplines. So there's trainers who work specifically with women who are pre and postnatal. You've got trainers who do yoga. and they run. You know, you've got you've got running coaches, you know. So I created the list and I just started putting people there, and these were trainers that I was following. And I realized that actually the list is so diverse. And so I showed it to some of my friends and they were like, oh, I never knew that person would be a good yoga teacher because of X reason. And then we started to have conversations about challenging misconceptions around physical activity and people who you normally wouldn't go to, but then when you did, you found out actually they're amazing trainers, they're an incredible physio. So that was one of the reasons why I started the list, is because I just wanted to have this one place where people could go and find trainers. But then it actually turned into another thing about a conversation. And over the last couple of weeks, with a lot of what we've seen with Black Lives Matter, is a lot of people started to question how and who they include in the fitness space. So something really interesting about the fitness space over here is that when you go to your local gym, so your sort of the one nearest to your house, the trainers are diverse. You've got black trainers, you've got Asian trainers, you've got white trainers, you've got trainers from sort of Eastern European, you've got all sorts of different trainers. But then when you go to the high-end gyms, it then changes. You see less diversity, whether that be in the members or even in the people delivering the classes. So it's one of those things where during this time I really wanted to show people that actually there's more than one kind of trainer out there. So you may normally just go to your normal fitness class and pay £20 or £25, but actually you're in lockdown, explore different people, learn about other people's training methods, learn about other disciplines. I mean, one of the things I got into last year, and I've really loved doing it in lockdown, is breathing sessions and just learning how to breathe. And the people who do it are just so diverse, but that's only I was able to discover them because of the lockdown. Otherwise, it would have only been the two practitioners that I had known before. So there's so many different things that people bring to the table that I think are not often seen. So that's one of the main reasons why I created that list.
So with that, I want to thank Harriet for being on the runway. It's so good to finally meet you kind of in person. So I was supposed to be running the London Marathon, which was postponed now to October, but I'm not doing it. If it does happen in October, I defer to 2021. So hopefully in April of 2021, we will finally get to meet in person and we can hang out. You can show me your side of London. And if you ever come to New York, you are more than welcome. I will show you around and give you the lay of the land, and we will have some fun. So thank you so much, Harriet, for being on the show. I will leave all of Harriet's Instagram links below so you can follow her, watch her Insta stories. She is a wealth of information. You know, she's our sister. So I want y'all to follow Harriet, because you know most of this audience is American, and we need to expand our horizons. There are more things outside of America, and Harriet is one of those people that you should be following. So do you want to tell the audience anything else?
I just want to say thanks for having me, and I love your podcast. It's really nice to listen to a podcast that's by a runner for runners and from a different perspective, because I think sometimes we as runners we tend to want the stuff from the coaches or which is more professional, and I think we forget the other side of it. So we always concentrate on the technicality of it. So we always want to talk about a tempo run or a fartlek or whatever it is, but I think these kind of issues are quite important for us to sort of have a conversation around.
Yeah, and that's why I created the show, because we're just regular runners, we're regular people, and we need to discuss topics that affect us. And this is a running podcast, but we're talking about social issues of racial injustice that's going on right now. So I just wanted to create a space where we can communicate and get our stories out and share our point of view. So again, thank you so much for being on the show. I so appreciate you, Harriet.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Be sure to subscribe to The Run Wave on your favorite podcast app and leave us a review of the show on Apple Podcasts. It would really help me out. If you are a runner that has a story to tell and you would like to be on the show, you can email hello@therunwave.com or send us a DM on Instagram to The Run Wave. See you next time.